Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome. Today, we are going to talk about the unconscious bias and how do we handle it in our communication. Today, in this episode, we're not just going to talk about leadership. We are going to talk about how we should speak, how we can listen, and how, without realizing it, our words carry a lot of meaning and weight more than what we intended to. Let me ask you all a question. Have you ever felt that when you said something you meant really well, but it landed in a wrong manner? Or maybe it was a comment in a meeting that someone misinterpreted, or you were about to give a feedback and that piece of feedback felt very neutral to you, but it stung the other person. Or it could as well be it was something you didn't say, something you missed, the moment where silence spoke volumes. If any of this has ever happened to you, I bet it has, because I've been in the situation multiple times. And I can assure you that you're not alone when these kind of misinterpretation of communication happens and then you talk something and it lands another way. It's something all of us deal as leaders. And that is what I would like to talk today. And it was often called as unconscious bias. And that's exactly what we're digging in today. How unconscious bias shows up in the communication, especially when we lead, be it a team, be it an organization, it could be anything that we lead. Because this isn't about hiring or the DEI statements. This is all about who gets heard, whose idea gets credited, and who gets interrupted in those meetings. It is also about the tone, the language, the silence, and the attention that we give to various people in our meetings and in the teams that we lead. So today, we are not looking for perfection. We are looking for awareness and better choices in communication. And we are going to walk through some stories, some real world examples, and simple shifts in communication that can actually make a huge impact in the teams that we lead. So, now let's get into it. So, what is an unconscious bias really is? Let's start here. It is not about being a bad person, or it is not even about being intentional in the wrong way it is being misinterpreted. Unconscious bias is simply how our brains try to make sense of the world, that too quickly. Our minds are constantly filtering and processing thousands of information every second. And to survive, what we do is we rely on certain shortcuts. And these shortcuts are formed through years and years of lived experience, media exposure, cultural conditioning, and even our childhood patterns that we did not even know where did we get this in first place. And the problem is these shortcuts don't always lead to fair, objective, or inclusive decisions. And when we are leading people, we are communicating, and these shortcuts shape how we show up through our communication. You see, unconscious bias doesn't always shout, it whispers. It shows up in those micro moments. Who you interrupt, who you let finish, whose ideas you build on, whose idea you just bypass and go away. How you respond when someone speaks with confidence versus when they are quieter or they speak differently from you. Even your body language, a smile for another person, a blank face, another person. So these are various ways how we show up as leaders in micro moments, and how we show up is determined by those shortcuts that we are having in our mind, those cultural conditioning that we have had, those media exposures, those lived experiences, and all of that do shape how we show up as leaders. Here's a scenario I think many of us might have seen. Let's assume you're in a meeting. A woman shares a thoughtful idea. And this thoughtful idea kind of floats in the room unheard. 5 minutes later, a male colleague says something very similar, and suddenly the energy shifts. People nod, and someone says, "Hey, that's a great point." You know what? These are not intentional. No one said, "Let's ignore her." But it happened. And that's exactly what is called unconscious bias. Now, here's another one. A team leader is giving a feedback to another person, and the tone is very nurturing. You're almost there. Let's polish this part a bit. And with another person, if the feedback was intentional, intending to be the same, it maybe looks and feels different. It's sharper, more critical. You missed the mark. This wasn't expected. Have you come across different delivery? The feedback is the same, but the delivery is very different. Why does this happen? It is all because of our unconscious bias. The way we show up in our communication differs from one person to another person. And once we start noticing it, we can actually start changing it. And let's be real. If you are in a leadership role, your words carry more weight. Your feedback echoes. Your attention validates. And your silence can silence other people. And that's exactly why bias in communication of a leader is such a big deal. When leaders unknowingly allow bias to shape their communication, here's exactly what happens. Number one, talented people feel unseen. Innovation stalls because not everyone feels safe to speak. Trust breaks down, and the diversity becomes performative instead of being powerful. And now I get it. Some folks might be thinking, but I treat everyone the same. Here's the thing, equality isn't about treating everyone the same, but it is all about noticing who's not being able to be seen and adjusting so they are. If I have to talk in the layman terms, it's a difference between giving everyone shoes and giving everyone the shoe that fits to them. So, when we talk about unconscious bias in communication, we're not just talking about being big or that's glaring mistakes. We are talking about the voice you subconsciously ignore because it doesn't match your idea. The inside joke that you crack that leaves someone out in the meeting room. The praise you give out of habit, and sometimes the silence that you give because of your oversight. It's those everyday tiny things that add up. And then when we go unchecked for a lot of time, they shape the workplace culture in ways that we don't even realize as leaders. Here's the thing that I did recently. I wanted to very badly start a culture of wishing birthday wishes to everyone in the team, not just happy birthday to you, but to make something very meaningful and customized. I started doing that, and then I realized I was not able to keep up with it. There were birthday wishes that I missed to wish. There were birthday wishes that came out late from my side. And these are certain things which shapes the culture when people consistently see that you are not consistent as a leader. But here's the good news, because these patterns are very subtle. They're also highly fixable. With awareness, with tools, and a little bit of pause, we all can start rewriting the patterns that we've been giving out as leaders. One of the most powerful things a leader can do is to just ask, did I really hear everyone in the meeting room today? Did I really respond the same way to the same level to all the inputs that was given today? Whose ideas did I build upon? And to whose idea did I overlook? And that's where the change begins. Because the truth is, we all have bias, but not all of us have the courage to look for it and do something about it. And that courage, and that reflection is what sets the inclusive leaders apart, and they're highly respected. So now that we understand what unconscious bias is and how quietly it shapes our leadership, let's make it real deal. Let's walk through some of the most common types of unconscious bias and see exactly how they sneak in into our everyday conversation as leaders. Because these aren't dramatic headline making moments, but they are subtle signals we send in the meetings, in the feedback, in one on one conversations, in the small talks that we give. Now let's step in and see what are those unconscious biases that all of us have. Let's start with number one, gender bias. Now, this one is a widespread one. More so, we can see women are often interrupted more, and their ideas are labeled as emotional, while there's while a man saying the same thing is being passionate about it. I once heard a manager describe a woman as too ambitious. Now let's flip that. When was the last time you heard a man being called too ambitious? Exactly. Now what can we do about it? The first and foremost thing is to catch gendered language. Now let's not default a woman as ones to who take the notes or plan team lunches. And when you see that happening around in your team or in your organization, kindly interrupt the pattern. Say it kindly but firmly that this pattern has to change. Let's start here because the gendered bias is the one which is most visible, yet something which is still not normalized. Let's say, imagine you are in a team meeting, two people are being considered to lead an upcoming project. You find yourself saying, she is great, but she's not sure she's assertive enough. He really owns a room, he's got that leadership presence. Here's the thing, both candidates have got great and strong pitches, but your language subtly favored one over the other. Now, imagine the exact same woman being described as being a little bit aggressive in other meeting. Are we looking at that catch there? We often hold women and men to different communication standards. Assertive men are confident, assertive women are difficult, bossy, emotional. Another one, asking women about their caregiving responsibilities in a way we don't ask men these days. Or will you be able to manage this with the kids? It may seem like a concern, but what it really signals is bias. So now what do we do instead? Start checking your adjectives. Use the same evaluation criteria across all the genders. And before making assumptions, ask yourself, would I ask or say this if the person in front of me were a man? So these are certain ways in which we can start making this minute transitions by checking your adjectives, checking and using the same evaluation criteria across genders. And before you make assumption, ask yourself if I would tell the same thing if the other person was a man. These are certain ways where we can actually counteract on the gender bias. Now let's move on to the second bias, which is the racial or ethnic bias. This can be harder to see and harder to even admit. Maybe it's assuming someone's not client ready because of their accent or talking over them because you unconsciously assume they are less confident or less qualified. Now, what can we do about it? Invite diverse voices, not as a tokenism, but because they truly bring a different value to the table. And if someone tells you your language was inappropriate, say thank you, not sorry. It means they trusted you enough to call it out, right? And that's how we start to work on this ethnic or the racial bias. Here's a subtle one that happens quite often. You are reviewing a feedback from a diverse team. One team member, let's say a person of color, gives a different input. It's clear, it's constructive, but it's firm. You read it and you say, thank you. Or you may say, that felt a little aggressive, right? Now, there's another team member, perhaps someone from a background similar to yours, gives the same level of critical feedback, and you think that is bold, and I like that. Same tone, same content, different interpretation. Now you see, that's ethnic bias in working. Bias often lives in how we perceive assertiveness, politeness, and even professionalism, especially across the cultures and the accents in which we speak. Now, here's another thing. You assume someone isn't client ready because the way they show up in their professionalism, they are sharp, they are qualified, they are engaging. Now, how can we shift this? Start noticing when your feedback or assessments are based on the style over substance. Because what's important is substance over style. Now, ask yourself, am I reacting to how this was said or what was being said? Because that's where you will shift your feedbacks from style to substance. And let's remember that the substance matters. And that way, we can slowly move ourselves away from this racial or ethnic bias. Now, with that, let's move on to the third bias, which is the confirmation bias. You know that, you know that feeling when you are already decided someone's difficult, and suddenly everything that they do reinforces that label difficult? That's confirmation bias at play. Now, what can we do quickly about it? Slow down. Ask, what would change if I assumed the opposite? It's a powerful reframe, isn't it? If I'm thinking of a person as difficult, now how can I assume they're soft, they're easy? If you start looking at them as an easy person, all this bias of confirmation can go away slightly but steadily. And this one is a sneaky one. It's the bias that makes us look for evidence to confirm what we've already believed. And that's exactly how our brain works. Our brain works and makes a perception on someone or a perception on some topic. What actually happens is that the brain goes ahead and scans everything which is happening around in the world, and it looks out for those evidences and witnesses and makes the perception more stronger. And that's how our brain works. But the question is, do we let our brain operate the way it operates, or should we stop that and work opposite so that we set good leadership example? Now, for example, you've labeled someone as difficult. Now, every time they speak up or they disagree, you interpret it as a negativity, even if their point was valid. Meanwhile, someone you already like shares a similar disagreement and you hear it as a challenging the status quo or thinking critically. Now, you see the difference of when you confirm someone being difficult and you like someone because they are similar to you. What helps in such a bias? Try this mental reset. What if I assume the opposite? If I believe someone is disengaged, can I find examples that show they are actually trying, but they feel unheard? So, assuming the opposite is called confirmation bias. So let us not confirm someone and label someone to what they are. Rather than let's train our mind to see things in a positive note. Because when we label someone on a negative note, whatever they say, whatever they perform, we are not going to look at the positive sides and aspects to it. With that, we will move on to the fourth bias for today, which is the recency bias. Ever write a performance review and only remember what that person did last week? You're giving feedback and only you remember the last blunder that the person has made, not their steady contributions over the last 1 year. And that's recency bias. Now, the solution is yes, keep notes, build structured reviews, let the data, not your memory, guide you. Let's say a team member had a tough moment during a presentation and you dwell on it in your feedback, forgetting that they delivered the three high impact results the last quarter. And how is it fair for a leader to be dwelling on one particular situation where that person has been consistently delivering performance and results and numbers over the last year or even earlier? Ladies and gentlemen, that's recency bias. And in communication, it comes through in things like they've been off a little lately. I don't feel the same energy from them anymore. Now, what's the solution to it? Keep a running log of positive and constructive moments and look at patterns, not snapshots, before you give feedback or make decisions. Because as leaders, when we make decisions, it really adds a lot of weight to other people. And let's not just make decisions based upon our recent memory. Let's start relying upon the log and data that we have had about a person. So that's about a recency bias. Now let's move on and look at our fifth bias, which is the overconfidence bias. This one's all about us. And this one's tricky. It's the belief that I'm a good communicator, I am fair, I treat everyone equally. And that may be mostly true, but we all do have blind spots as leaders. Do we agree on that? And now what's the fix? Feedback. Regular, raw, and reflective feedback. Ask your team, how do I show up in meetings? Whose ideas do I amplify or whose ideas do I ignore? It's when we assume that we are objective. That's our gut. That our gut is always right when we start assuming, and that we don't have bias. In communication, it looks like this: not asking for input because you already know you have the answer, giving advice without listening, dominating conversations because you are the expert. What are these? These are all overconfident bias. It seems that you know yourself too well and you think that you know all the answers. You can understand the other person without even listening to them. You think your idea is the best idea. That's not something a leader should have. So, how do we go about and fix this overconfident bias? It is to pause, ask more than you tell, listen more than you speak. Say things like, what's your take on this? I might be missing something. Can you please help me understand your view? And leaders who model humility also model inclusion in their communication. And that's very important for all of us. So, so far, we did look at the various unconscious biases that we all tend to have as leaders and how those unconscious biases start subtly showing up in the communication. And over time, when people look at the communication patterns, they will either be disengaged or lose trust in you as leaders. And that's not a good news. So there you have it: gender bias, racial bias, confirmation bias, recency bias, overconfidence bias, and how they quietly shape leadership communication. The real question is the real question isn't, do I have bias as a leader? The real question is, how is my bias shaping how I show up for others? And what am I doing to check it? Because once you start seeing these patterns, you can't unsee them. And that's when the real change starts, and you can show up as a better leader. All right, now let's get into something really practical. Let's talk about those actual words that we use. And that's how we shift our communication, right? Because here's the truth: unconscious bias doesn't just show up in decisions, it starts showing up in languages. The everyday phrases that you talk, the emails that you send, the feedback that you give, even the compliments that you give to your team members. And most of us don't even realize it. We might think we are being clear, we are being encouraging, we are being funny, but our words can unintentionally carry certain stereotypes, certain assumptions, or exclusions, especially when you're dealing and leading a diverse teams. Now let's get real here. Language is the power. As leaders, our words shape belonging, credibility, visibility, and even trust. So today, we are going to spot those subtle signs of bias in communication. And more importantly, we'll talk about how to fix it without walking on the eggshells or even sounding too strict about it. Let's start with some phrases. All right. You've probably heard these, maybe you've even used them. And I know I have done that. And here's a simple tip I like to share with clients. I call it the bias in translation. Let's start with biased, and then we will see how do we shape them into being more inclusive. Biased could be you guys. Inclusive language could be team, everyone. Biased could look like she's so aggressive. And inclusive could be she is direct or assertive. And we may also tend to use words like blacklist, whitelist. Instead of that, that could be that ethnic or racial bias that could be misinterpreted as, you could say blocklist, allow list. Instead of saying crazy, you could say that's unexpected or that was intense. So these are few shifts that we can start using in our daily conversation, and not to use something like a chairman and start using chairperson. So that is more inclusive as a phrase or a word. And minding our language every day makes us being more away from such biases. You guys may seem very harmless, right? It's very casual, and I've used it a lot of times until I discovered about the biases myself. But here's the thing: when you're addressing a mixed gender or all female group and you say you guys, you are defaulting to the masculine norm, and that subtly reinforces who the room is for. Now, I'm not saying we need to obsess over every word, but there's small tweaks like saying team, saying everyone, or folks can actually help everyone feel seen and the room is belonging to everyone. And that's when you win in any leader's book. Now, the second one, when we talked about she's aggressive, that's a classic phrase that we all get to listen. I've been told I'm aggressive. If a man is assertive, he's a driver, he's a go getter. But what really happens is if a woman brings the same kind of energy, she's been sometimes labeled as aggressive, emotional, or too much. And these aren't just words, they shape the perception. They shape the career trajectories for those women. So the next time you catch yourself using language like that, pause and ask yourself, would I describe a man the same way? Is this a personality trait or just a communication style I'm just so used to have? Try reframing words with clear, direct, assertive, passionate. These are all very positive terms that can be used. Now let's move on to the third word that we spoke, the blacklist, whitelist. These are terms which are deeply embedded in tech and security language, but they also carry that racially charged connotation. So, black, bad, white, good, that's very subtle, but it's there. And inclusive alternatives already exist for us, and why not we use that, right? Using block list, allow list, same function, but it's very strictly away from getting into that racial or ethnic bias. Language is always evolving. What I'm telling is that let's also evolve with it. Let's learn new words and start using them when we keep ourselves away from those biases. Sometimes we also say that's crazy. Now, this one's interesting because it's so normalized in a conversation. We say things like, that's crazy, she's totally insane. But these phrases can be hurtful, especially to some people who live with mental health challenges or neurodivergence. You don't need to censor yourself to silence, but why don't we use healthier alternatives? Hey, that was unexpected. Huh? That surprised me. You see, same energy, but more inclusive. You're not hurting anyone. You're not leaving anyone out in the conversation, out in the room. So now here's a quick language audit we all can start using. Now, how do we actually change our language? Let me give you a simple three-question audit. You can use this when you're writing emails, giving feedback, leading meetings, anywhere your words start showing up. Ask yourself, the first question, is this inclusive? Am I using the language that includes all the genders, all the backgrounds and abilities? Second question, could this be misread or misheard in the room that we are in? Would this land differently for someone who doesn't share my culture, my experience, or my language fluency? Because the shortcut that we spoke in the earlier speaks about what are our belief system, how are we culturally conditioned, and that acts as a filter to our quick communication. Now, taking time and asking questions like, how would it land differently for people who are not in my culture, who doesn't speak my language, my experience, is very important to take that moment and start speaking. Am I unintentionally reinforcing a stereotype? Are there hidden assumptions in my objectives? In who do I compliment or who do I critique? You start looking at your own patterns and see every time you walk out of your meeting, you think for yourself, am I complimenting the same person over and over again? Or am I being critical to the same person over and over again? Am I building upon the ideas of the same person over and over again? And am I rejecting the ideas from the same person over and over again? And the answer to this will give you a very clear indication of what bias that you're carrying. You don't have to be perfect, just aim to get it right every day. And it'll take us a long way in our leadership journey and how we show up in our communication. Now, how do we take this further? Here's a tip that works wonders. Read your email, read your message loud every time before you're sending it. What sounds neutral in ourselves might sound harsh when spoken. Have you heard about people? Hey, that sounded better in my head. And to avoid all of that is to read the message loud and see if it'll hurt another person when it is spoken out loud. Think about performance reviews. An email that says, you need to improve your leadership presence might sound just vague or even a personality critic. But saying you have strong contributions and I'd love to see you speak up more in strategy meetings to showcase your thinking. Now you see, that's very clear and actionable and supportive. And tone matters a lot. Let me give you a very quick real world examples. Let's talk about a feedback email. What is a feedback email which looks biased? It goes on to read like, you've been too emotional in meetings lately. Try to stay professional. This is how a biased email will look. Now, if you have to move towards inclusive communication, you can write, hey, your passion was very clear. Let's find out a way to challenge that into a structured input so that your ideas get the traction they deserve. You see how, from a biased email, you could be actually writing out a inclusive email? And the job postings, we've all read through the job postings. How does a job posting, which is a little biased, looks like? We're looking for a rock star who can crush deadlines in a high pressure environment. How does it look for inclusive? We're looking for a detailed oriented team player who thrives in collaborative and fast paced settings. That talks about being in the team, more inclusive, same goal, and more people are invited in. At the end of the day, this isn't about tiptoeing around in language, it's about speaking in ways that's more inclusive. It's about being heard without hurting anyone. Inclusive communication isn't about being politically correct, it is about being intentionally respectful. It says to your team, no matter where you are, you matter here in this team, in this organization. I see you. I'm willing to learn with you. And as a leader, that is not soft or vulnerable. That's being very strong as a leader. So the next time you're about to send that Teams message, write that email, or even lead that meeting, pause for a beat. Run that language audit in your mind. Read it aloud before you send out that meeting and ask, am I leading with respect? Or that routine where that shortcuts are filtering my communication and it just gives my communication from the shortcut. Because better words lead to better connection. And that better connection, and that's exactly where our leadership, strong leadership, begins. So now that we learned about all those unconscious biases that we've been having so far, let us think about every day how are we sending out that unconscious cues to people and how are we supposed to be moving in from those unconscious biases in our communication to more inclusive communication where we respect people and they feel that they are being respected, they are being felt, heard, seen. If there's one thing that you could take away from this particular session, I hope you take today that unconscious bias doesn't make you a bad leader, but ignoring it makes us all an ineffective leader because all of us do have blind spots. We all carry assumptions. But the difference between an average leader and a great leader is the willingness to see them, to own them, and to grow into them. And simply by learning what is unconscious bias today, let's start reflecting and choose to lead with more awareness and more better words, effective words in our communication starting from today. Thank you for joining me today. And until next time, lead with clarity and speak with care. Thank you.